Hello everyone, this is João from Salmonella Place, and today we're going to be doing an anatomy tutorial on the terms of location and direction, cardinal planes, and axes. I'm going to be doing this very basic topic, but important because you need to know how to locate body structures in anatomy. Another thing that I would like to say is that I'm going to go between Latin and English because some programs do this or use the Latin terminology and others do or teach in English. Now the first thing to know, first thing that we're going to talk about are cardinal planes. And it's important to know that there are three. And the first one that I'm going to highlight here, this is the sagittal plane. Sagittal plane, why? Because we have here a skull to show you that the sagittal plane is parallel to the sagittal suture that you see here. And this plane runs from front to back and cuts, let's say, the body or divides the body into right and left. Another important thing to know, and what I have here, is an exact, so if the sagittal section that you see here is made in the exact midline, it will result in equal and symmetrical right and left halves, and this then is called the mid-sagittal plane, exactly as we see here. If we were to move this plane here a little bit to the left or the right, then but still maintaining the same position as we see here, the same front to back direction, what we would do, say if we would move a little bit this way, this then would be called the parasagittal plane. Now, clearing up this sagittal plane here, I'm going to move on to the second plane, and this is the coronal plane. And also using the skull here, I can show you that the coronal plane is parallel or runs parallelly with a coronal suture here on the skull. Another important thing to say is that lengthwise this plane will be running from side to side as you see here, and it divides the body or any of its parts into interior. I'm going to show here with an arrow, so with anterior and posterior portions, let's say. Also called, this can also be called the frontal plane. Now moving on to the third and final plane. This is called the transverse plane, and it's a crosswise plane that divides the body or any of its parts into the upper, as you see here, and the lower parts, and is also called the horizontal plane. So now we're going to discuss the three body axes using the three body planes that we have here. And the first one is the vertical or longitudinal axis, as I'm drawing here. And in the standing position, this axis will run through the body craniocaudally, meaning from the head to the tailbone, and is perpendicular to the ground. Also, it's important to know that it lies in the intersection of the coronal and sagittal planes. The next axis that I need to discuss is the sagittal axis, and this axis is running antero-posteriorly, meaning from the front to the back or vice versa, and lies at the intersection of the sagittal and transverse planes. Third and final body axis that we need to know is the transverse or horizontal axis. And this one is running from side to side as we see here and lies at the intersection of the coronal and transverse planes. Now it's time for us to talk about body directions, and I have a frontal view here of this model where we can clearly see this arrow here representing the mid-sagittal plane or the sagittal plane, and this arrow here in the middle is representing the transverse plane. So the first two directions that you need to know is left versus right. Left in Latin is sinister, and right in Latin is dexter. Now, how do you determine left from right when you're looking at a subject or looking at a structure? Well, these directions are always determined based on the subject's perspective. So anything found on this side, this is the subject's left side, so therefore this is a left part. And we can call or say that the lung here found here is the left lung and the left kidney, and so on and so forward. Same thing applies on this side, so anything on this area here, this is right, the right side of the subject, and therefore we can call the right lung, the right kidney, and so on and so forward. Moving on to other directions that we need to know. Another two L's that I need to write for lateral. And lateral are any structures that are found toward the side. They're away from this mid-sagittal plane that you see here. So any structure that goes away from this mid-sagittal plane are found laterally. An example of this, if we compare the eyes with the nose, the eyes are definitely found lateral to the nose because it's going away from the mid-sagittal plane. Now, another direction that we need to talk about is medial or medialis in Latin. These are structures that are found toward the mid-sagittal plane. So any structures that are going toward this mid-sagittal plane are found medially. And an example of that, of course, using the same example, is that the nose is found medially compared to the eyes. So now let's talk about another two directions that we could see here. And I'm going to write S for superior and I for inferior. So superior are any structures that are found on the top of the body. Say the shoulders are superior to the hips. And inferior are any structures found towards the bottom of the body. And for example, the stomach is inferior to the heart. So we have a side view of the body here where we can discuss a few other directions. The first one is anterior, and these structures are definitely found toward the front of the body. An example here is the nose. If we see here, the nose is on the anterior or the front part of the head. Another equivalent word for anterior is ventral, because ventral comes from the word belly. So these structures are found along or toward the belly surface of the body. An example of this would be the navel is on the ventral surface. Now on the opposite side, then we find posterior. So there are structures that are found toward the back or the rear. And an example of this, if we compare the nose with the ear is definitely found on the posterior side of the nose, or posteriorly to the nose. Another equivalent word to posterior is dorsal, and dorsal means back. So these structures are found along or toward the vertebral surface of the body, so along this way here. Now previously I mentioned that there are some structures found inferiorly, meaning that they are on the bottom or below other structures. And there are structures found superiorly or on the top of the body or above other structures. Now there are other equivalent terms to superior and inferior, and that is Cranial for superior is cranial, or cephalad, meaning that the structure is close to the head. On inferior, you have caudal or caudad from the word tail. And if you know well the tailbone or found in humans, or the coccyx, then anything towards that area is called caudal. Say if you compare the ear to the shoulder, you can say that the ear is located cranially to the shoulder, and the shoulder is located caudally to the ear. Now here I would like to describe two directions, proximal versus distal. And these directions are used to describe limbs or appendages, say the arms or the legs, and their distance, let's say, from the trunk. So say I want to compare a shoulder with a finger. Since the finger is located more distant from the trunk than the shoulder, then I would say that the finger is located distally compared to the shoulder. Now the shoulder then is located proximally because it is closer to the trunk. If you look closely at your textbooks, you will usually see that the model's hands are usually, or the palm of their hands are usually facing forward. Because when you mention on the palmar region is usually this direction. So anything found on the palmar side then usually has the name, or has palmar associated to its name. Now on the opposite side, or the back of the hand, is called dorsal. This is the dorsal side of the hand. And usually you will see that structures on this side have dorsal to their names. When you're looking at structures of the feet or on the feet, you have two directions that you need to consider. One is the superior part, but also known as the back of the feet, and that's of course the dorsal part. Anything on this side here on the plant of the feet, then it's called inferior or plantar. So I'm drawing here a midline, and this is the last slide of this lecture, where I'm going to show you that there are other ways of giving directions based on the bones. So say if I want to use the radius and the ulna, so I'm going to write here, this is the position or direction of the radius, and the ulna is found here. And if I go down to the lower leg, I can say that the fibula is found here, and on this place I can find, on this area here, or direction, I can find the tibia. And looking here, this is the midline. So towards the midline, or medially, I can find the ulna and the tibia. And I can also say and describe that structures are found on the ulnar side or the tibial side. And the same thing, going away from the midline, I find things, the radius and the fibula, going laterally, and therefore I can say that structures are found on the radial and fibular side.